Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I am your host, Sunil Lala. Joining us this evening is the Honorable Fitzgerald Hinds, the Minister of National Security. Good evening, Minister, and welcome back to Delving Deeper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lala. It is a pleasure being in your company and that of your wide viewership yet again.
So government would have invested about several $billion in the fight against crime. National security comes back up there with education and health and so on. How is your ministry going to use this budgetary allocation to tackle crime in the coming year?
Crime is, as you know, very pervasive, multifaceted. We as a nation face several enduring threats: human trafficking, climate change, narco trafficking, gun trafficking, and such like. So the government, in response to the needs of the society, allocated on this occasion a substantial amount of the national budget to continue to treat with those issues. And of course, this allocation is broken down and apportioned to the various sections of the Ministry of National Security. For example, the police service, the defense force, the fire service, the prison service, the probation service, and such like. So yes, we intend to focus the allocation on all of those in the interests of public safety and security.
We recently saw that the police made two major discoveries of arms and ammunition. You've been very vocal about the influx of guns into the country. Can you tell us about the ministry's border security strategy to help stop this from coming into the country?
Happily, I'm able to report that we have taken a number of initiatives to improving our border management. We have, for an example, recently improved our marine assets with the acquisition of the two custom-built Cape-class vessels, one of which I sailed on for some 16 hours in company with the Honorable Prime Minister. And we did that because we rely on the professionals to advise us and to direct the things that they need in order to carry out the job on behalf of the public. So we went there to get a feel of what was done, and a feel we sure did. So we have improved our marine craft. Right now we have allocated a substantial amount of that money to resailing some of the vessels that are not sailing now due to the need for maintenance and repair. So this is one of the things we have done. We also recognize that in this border security effort, our legal ports of entry have proven to be some of the most vulnerable elements of our nation's experience. As a result, we have continued to train and professionalize the personnel who must manage these borders. In particular, we, Trinidad and Tobago, signed on to two international and best practice formulae: AirCop, dealing with our airports, and CCOP, dealing with the marine ports or seaports. And we have trained the personnel, we have resourced them, and they are on the job. We have allocated money and we are in the process of obtaining more scanners. We already have fixed scanners. We are getting a couple more of those. We are getting some mobile scanners. We are getting 16 more hand scanners, improving the use of technology in dealing with this issue. And so, in addition to that, we have allowed our personnel to be exposed to the best-in-class training anywhere in the world you could think about, send them on programs. We bring professionals here to further professionalize and train them. All of these things we do in terms of immigration, because human trafficking is one of the issues. We have improved the technology that we use in the immigration division to better manage our borders. So altogether, border security is a major plank of our efforts at national security, and we give a lot of time and attention to those.
I know you would have recently sailed with the Prime Minister on the TTS Scarborough, one of the Cape-class vessels. Any opinions or any views on how this can be improved, or what did you observe on the voyage?
Well, as you identified, those two vessels, the two military vessels, they were purchased, ordered in 2018, and they came into service in 2021. It was one of those that I traveled on. The ferries are for the civilian population in the inter-island arrangements between Trinidad and Tobago. And while we were out there in one of the military vessels, we did see one of the, I think it was the Boca Reef, going by on its regular trip to Tobago and back. So yes, the Cape-class vessels is what we spoke on, and we found it to be working particularly well. I was in absolute admiration of the young men and women of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard who manage these vessels and conduct these marine exercises. We actually saw them at work, where using the 360-degree radar system that we have, they identified a target of interest, as they call it, and I saw them deploy one of the ship's boats, those smaller craft, speed craft, on the larger vessel. They let it down into the water. Personnel got on board, sufficiently equipped, and they went out into the night to find this target of interest, and they did their work. So it was really a good thing to see. And to think that the Prime Minister would have gone to Australia on other business, and as part of his visit, they allowed him a trip, a luxury trip, on one of those Cape-class vessels. And he, in consideration of the fact that the waters around Australia's immigration issues are as an island continent, is very similar to the ones we were having. So he raised with Prime Minister Turnbull the need for, he said to him, he would like to see some of these vessels deployed in the fight against the illegal importation of arms and narcotics and human persons. And so the story began, and the Australian government rallied behind Dr. Rowley, and today we have those. And as I indicated earlier, we are in the throes, as we speak now, of bringing 12 vessels that we now own back into full top-level service by upgrading and repairing every one of them. So in a very short while, Trinidad and Tobago will have in service many more vessels than we now have, as we seek to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago in our border security efforts.
If I remember correctly, one of these Cape-class vessels would have made a find in the past recent months. I know it's a matter of national security, but any other finds since that?
Oh yes, I was happy to observe that our CCOP team and our transnational organized crime unit, two vetted units of the law enforcement family, they, having received certain intelligence, developed it for the last few months, and they engaged in a search of a vessel at the CARICOM jetty and found a substantial, I think it was about 8.8 kilograms of hybrid marijuana, not ordinary marijuana. And this one, information came from the United States, and recently they had another major find from Canada. In these countries, they are now genetically maneuvering the marijuana plants and raising the level of THCs in them from the normal 41 or 42% up to 80 and 85%. So when you smoke that, the impact of it is far more severe, I would say, than regular marijuana. And therefore, we were quite happy to record regular seizures in those respects. And I'll tell you, as Minister of National Security, I receive a weekly report from an organization that we call JITAF, a Joint Interagency Team, working along with the US's Southern Command. They break their military up into a few commands. Southern Command deals with our area, the Caribbean and the Americas. So we have representatives from our militaries in CARICOM, as Trinidad and Tobago does, inside of JITAF. And I receive, as Minister of National Security, weekly briefings as to their activities out there. And I can tell you, without exaggeration, every single week, they intercept vessels on the seas, the Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, crisscrossing those oceans, bringing stuff into this region. And every week, not every target of interest yields success, but they, on a weekly basis, could get 10, 15 tons of cocaine and copious amounts of marijuana and weapons and arrest persons and that sort of thing. So when I listened, for example, recently to a very blindsided, intellectually soft and ignorant leader of the opposition telling the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the fight has only to be on land, not at sea, and said so to justify the obliteration, the dismantling of the marine asset program that we engaged when we bought 3 ocean patrol vessels, each of which was set with helicopter and speedboat interceptor capacity. As I told you, you saw them launch the ship's boat off of the larger one into the water to go closer inland. We had that with 3 OPVs. And when we challenged her about her reckless dismantling of those in defense of her feeble self, she said the fight don't have to be on the sea, it have to be on the land. So when I get these weekly reports and see the kinds of things that we stop from coming in, and my understanding as Minister of National Security, how the cost of these things proliferate once they hit the land. Because one, when they hit the land and they are dispersed into our communities, they are harder for law enforcement to find and to retrieve. When they hit the land and our victim citizens who can't say no to drugs of all descriptions use them, then they end up mentally unstable, all kinds of mental and other issues. They are unable to work. We lose productive elements of our workforce. They are unable to study, to develop themselves. They abandon their families, becoming coke addicts, pipers as we call them. So the cost is exponentially increased once it hits the land. So I dismiss the suggestion by the goodly lady, and I'm really proud of the fact that Trinidad and Tobago has put itself in a place where I can tell you here today that we have and continue to improve our efforts at border security and to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Minister, I want to ask you about these scanners. I know we've started the process to procure some scanners. What's the update with that?
Well, as I indicated, those were to be in addition to what we already have, and the contracts have been settled, and we expect importation and application of these in the shortest possible time.
During your budget presentation, you indicated there were about 311,000 police patrols. I know this sounds a lot, but is this enough?
Well, it's never enough. We are experiencing a burgeoning crime situation where more and more people, and for some with greater ferocity and intensity, are perpetrating all manners of crimes against the people of Trinidad and Tobago, including women and children. So police presence is very critical. Patrols are one of the ways that the police make themselves present as a deterrent and also to detect crime and other infractions of the law. The presence of the police in stations, in districts where the civilian population can go and make reports, whether it's the victim support unit, whether it's the child protection unit, and all the other police stations. The fact that the police officers do guard duty in various places around the country. So it's not only police patrols that cause them to be present. That's just one of the ways. So it's never enough. We could always do more because we are having an upsurge in murders for the past couple of years. So I would always want to see more and greater police presence in response to this. But the work continues. The idea for me is to train, to motivate, to encourage, and to resource our officers of law enforcement, particularly the police, so that they would be more passionate about what they do and push back harder against those who push hard against us with their crime and criminality.
We always talk about the fear of crime. What assurances can you give to members of the public who feel unsafe?
Well, I can say that we understand your situation, we understand your plight, and the government has taken a very new approach to responding to this. We now, along with all the other governments in CARICOM, we now approach crime as a public health concern. And as a result of that, we are treating it the way we treated the public health concern that was COVID-19. We are taking a whole of government, whole of society, whole of region, whole of world approach to responding to this social phenomenon of crime. And in this regard, all must participate. Just like with COVID-19, individuals saw the need to purchase sanitizer, to wear gloves when they were touching public food, like serving or what have you, to wear masks, to follow the law and not congregate, whether it was at school or church or on the block. We all were willing to make those personal sacrifices. The planes didn't fly like they used to. The ships didn't sail like they used to. A lot of regional, international, and individual sacrifices came in. We are taking a similar approach in respect of crime and violence, and it will highlight the need for all of us to respond to it. You see, in the COVID situation, private companies made donations for this and for that, and we improved the technologies so that we could have had hybrid or we could have had virtual classes. Those are the kinds of things. So the society must understand the government has its role, and that includes law enforcement. But NGOs, faith-based organizations, the family units, parents, adults, the media have our responsibility equally. It will equally require a regional approach, and that is demonstrated in the fact that recently we at CARICOM established the CARICOM Gang Intelligence Unit, using vetted units from all of the islands, working together, sharing intelligence, whether it is about drugs, individuals, entities, vessels, movement of weapons. We work in collaboration with the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the United States, the DEA, all of the agencies, law enforcement of the United States, the Customs and Border Patrol people, they are here with us. We work together with them as a region in response to this burgeoning question of gun trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, transnational crime generally, in our response to it. So the public, in answer to your question, must understand that we are doing what we consider to be we are implementing the international best standard, best approach. We are professionalizing our law enforcement people, providing our defense force, prison service, police service, fire service with top-level international quality training, motivating them, inspiring them, tooling them, resourcing them, so that they will come out here and to be present and to stand in the gap between you, the citizen, the law-abiding citizen. And by that I mean a citizen who will not contribute to the problem. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of people who shout loudly about crime, but they are contributors to it, Sometimes deceitfully knowing that they are contributors, sometimes unwittingly. We all have a role to play in this. And therefore, when we do this, we will all share the confidence that things will be safer and better for all of us in Trinidad and Tobago.
The death penalty is still the punishment for someone found guilty of murder. Given the high murder rate in this country for the year so far, do you think enforcing this would be a deterrent?
Well, that is the view held by the majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago. The last, I think they did many years ago, showed that 91% of the people of Trinidad and Tobago favored the implementation of the death penalty. It is a very highly debatable issue, very emotional. I have spanned all elements of it because while I studied human rights law in my master's degree at the University of London some time ago, I understood a lot about the death penalty that would challenge any intellectual as to its viability. But then, on the other hand, when I see the callous, brutal, sinful expression of man, advantaging weak people, women, children, each other, so wantonly. They featured a young man, I suspect a non-national from what they said, come down the road running with a gun, just went, shoot up some place, and calmly, very calmly, walk back to his. I think you might have seen it too from the nod of your head. When I see things like that, I understand why some thinkers would say you have to let the deterrent work against the likes of that individual. So the thing is debatable, but it is the law of Trinidad and Tobago. We have not been able to implement it. In 1993, the Privy Council, our highest court, laid down some principles in a case called Pratt and Morgan, saying that after the date of conviction, you have 5 years to carry out the death penalty. But it has proven to be almost impossible to do that, given the other constitutional ingredients that you must offer the accused, the convicted person, and that those processes, including the Mercy Committee, which I chair, as the last stop, we must all carry out certain clearly defined legal approaches, rendering the 5 years to be very, very challenging indeed. So we have not been able to carry out the death penalty. The thing still hangs in the balance, but I do understand the sentiment.
In the last 2 decades, how many inmates on death row had their sentences commuted to life in prison?
All of them. So since we would have carried out the last hanging, 1993 was the judgment of Pratt and Morgan, and since then, I think in 1999 we had the hangings of Dolce and a couple other persons. So since 1999, all persons, once they made 5 years and were not they're subject to our hanging law, then their sentences would have been commuted to terms of imprisonment as mandated by the courts.
As we're on the topic with public and safety, there have been calls in the population for better access to legal guns. Does the government have a view on this?
Well, let me put it this way. Since our independence as a nation, and we have had many commissioners of police since then, we had a Firearms Act of 1970, and the government in that law had a particular philosophy, and that is the restrictive approach to firearms. That is to say, a license will be granted to anyone or any business once they demonstrate that there was a need for it and that they can manage these instruments safely. That is typically the restrictive approach that all commissioners of police followed as a policy in relation to the implementation of the Firearms Act. And so everyone was free to apply. The police will investigate to see what were your circumstances, self-protection, business, large amounts of cash, and those sorts of things to determine. And of course, your suitability. Within recent times now, they make an inquiry of your spouse to determine whether you are a person with a short fuse and likely to demonstrate some characteristics that are unbecoming of someone who must safely carry a firearm. So on the other hand, as opposed to the restrictive system or philosophy, there's the more liberal approach, which you see practiced in large chunks of the United States, pushed on by the gun lobby, where every shadow must have a gun, or 2, or 3, or 60, or 500. And you see in the United States and other parts of the world, in that arena, in those circumstances, you have mass shootings and strange occurrences involving thousands of deaths each year. Like the United States last year would have accounted for about close to 800 mass shootings. Because you can just walk into any shop. I have gone into shops in the United States and you could buy anything you want. Anything. That's not what we do in Trinidad and Tobago. Because of the burgeoning crime situation, naturally, a lot of citizens made greater demands for firearm licenses. And the commissioners of police, every one of them, continue to practice this restrictive philosophy. Granting licenses, yes, but having satisfied themselves that you need it and you can safely manage it, and that you were trained so to do. Well, within recent times, of course, we had who I consider to be an outrider commissioner. I would go further to say one who broke the philosophy and went on a frolic of his own. And apparently he had a liberalist philosophy in his mind. A lot of matters pertaining to that are now under police investigation, and as Minister of National Security, it behoves of me to be restrictive in my comments upon that. But suffice it to say, when the issues became known to the government, the Prime Minister as chairman of the National Security Council, yours truly as minister, the previous minister, Minister Young, we began to seek concrete information. In so doing, we established 3 teams of persons who, in successive periods, conducted investigations into serious allegations about a change in the approach, the philosophy by the police commissioner that was not consistent with the philosophy and the policy of the government. It turned out that he accounted for the issuance of more firearms than all the commissioners of police put together since independence, and more ammunition. Yesterday, I would learn that the police intercepted a vehicle somewhere on this island and found 600 rounds of 5.56 ammunition, assault-type ammunition, used in assault-type weapons, automatic or semi-automatic. That commissioner allowed persons who had semi-automatic weapons to import what we call component parts, so that you could use that part and convert it from semi-automatic, meaning a single burst, to fully automatic. So we have found in the last few months, since his departure from that office, copious amounts of 7.62, a type of ammunition that the police and the defense force and many countries of the world under the umbrella of the United Nations have banned because of their inherent damaging character. Not even our soldiers use them. We have been finding a lot of that kind of ammunition, and we are aware that a lot of that was allowed to be imported in the madness that took place for the last few years. So we understand that there is crime. We understand that there is increasing levels of intensity of same. and we understand how the population feels. But we believe that if we professionalize, resource, train, motivate, organize the police organization and law enforcement more generally, that organization will be able to do far more in standing in the gap and not leaving it up to innocent citizens to have to defend themselves and all of the implications of that. Suffice it to say that one of the 3 inquiries that we had to ascertain the facts of this matter was led by a retired Court of Appeal judge, the very distinguished Mr. Stanley John, retired Court of Appeal judge. And he, having looked at what I have just described to you, described it in writing as a well-oiled criminal enterprise. By that, I think he meant that what he saw suggested that the motivation was not so much about security, not even of the people to whom these things were made so easily accessible, but it was motivated by other extraneous considerations. So he called it a well-oiled criminal enterprise. Those matters continue to be under police investigation, and as a result, I would be loath to say anything more about them.
Law enforcement officers have also expressed concern about their safety. Is the ministry looking into this?
In which case, the police service has always, police officers function 24 hours per day. And many of them are able to function armed and are able to function as that stands. Recently, we went to Parliament because prison officers are a very important stakeholder in the national security apparatus and in the criminal justice system. By virtue of what those professionals of the prison service do, they came into the focus and for adverse attention of the criminals who they have responsibility for when the judges and the magistrates send persons in incarceration or pending bail. And because of that, we went to Parliament recently and we got the support of the Parliament. It was a simple majority measure. It did not require the support of the opposition. Otherwise, we may not have gotten it, as it is their want to do. But we got the parliamentary support enough from our side to amend the Firearms Act to allow the prison commissioner to make weapons available to prison officers, although they are not on actual duty at the nation's prisons, for the reasons I have stated. And the other areas of law enforcement, they do use firearms. Our intelligence community do use firearms. They have found themselves in crossfire already and in very difficult circumstances. So they too. So in terms of law enforcement, they have access to these things in the interest of self and general public safety.
Tell us about some of your new policies in the new fiscal year, and how will you determine if they are yielding the correct results?
Well, we have, in this public health approach, we've always practiced creating opportunities for young people. So we see that as a diversion from a pathway, a life of crime and criminality. So whether it is the formal education system, which moves seamlessly from early childhood to primary, to secondary, to tertiary level education, all supported by the state, at least in large part. Whether it is our housing policy, where we provide low-cost, subsidized, easily accessible mortgages through the Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance and houses through the HDC, formerly the NHA, whether it's rental, whether it is rent to own, whether it is an out-and-out purchase, whether it is our investment in the Ministry of Health, particularly dealing with psychological and mental health issues, whether it is in social development, where we spend about $7 billion a year to make things and benefits available to people who can't cope with it in market terms on their own, and whether it is in the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service that deals with a catchment of the nation's population between the ages of 10 and 35, creating all kinds of programs in agriculture, in all of the skills training programs that they have, and national service concepts, discipline, production, tolerance, integrity, parenting, family life, and all these very important values. All of these are part of the ways that the government took to implementing to ensure that our young people are given opportunities to maximize the talents that God gave to them. And so they have no excuse. They have no reason for wanting to prey on others in order to make a living for yourself. As David Rudder say, you don't have to cheat to be a winner. You don't have to steal to get enough. You don't have to give up your manly, God-given attributes and behave like something else instinctively. Run and hide in the gully, hide in the drain, hide behind the fridge, grab a piece of cheese, run back. No, that's not what man is supposed to be. Man is to be like you, to be proud, to be strong, to have a family, to assume responsibility, to work, to be respected, to respect others, to protect others, your family, the neighborhood. That's what man is. And that's what we are about to do.
I think David Rudder would be looking on and making sure that you got those words correct at this point in time.
I think I did. He's one of my favorite performers, and I know many of his songs word perfect.
Minister, you cited climate change as one of the threats facing our society. How is your ministry looking to address this?
We have the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, led, of course, by a very active and passionate CEO and others. And through the ODPM, again, that agency is responsible for coordinating disaster management, disaster response, disaster recovery in Trinidad and Tobago. But just like our law enforcement platform, we expose the organization and its membership to the best in class that exists anywhere in the world. We have signed on to the international standard of the Sendai Agreement that was signed in Japan. We participate in that, and we have been following that scrupulously. Recently, I had the honor to go down to the Diego Martin area to inaugurate another one of the early warning systems that we have put in place. In that case, it was a river rise assessment technology. So when the water levels in the river begin to rise, it informs the base, and therefore we know that something is happening upstream, and therefore we can move resources, we can move people because we got an early warning sign, and there are many other ways. So the ODPM is the tip of the spear in terms of our disaster preparedness and response and management in Trinidad and Tobago. As you know, the 14 regional corporations are the first responders, but where they find that their resources cannot cope with the particular disaster or challenge, then of course the Defense Force, the Fire Service, the Police Service, and all the other agencies come in a well-organized program that we have. And so far, so good. But with climate change, anything is to be expected. So it is never going to be perfect. It's about keeping watch, keeping ready, and continuing to just inform and sensitize the people of Trinidad and Tobago to respond to this challenge of climate change and the adverse effects of same.
Can you tell us briefly about some of your challenges, some of your successes as National Security Minister?
Well, I think there are many. I have said before, 85% of the things we do in national security would not be worthy of public commentary, in my view. So it is for others to judge. I just get on with the work, do it, as I said, diligently, do it with passion, and the results will eventually speak for themselves. I know as we improve our border security and stop drugs and guns and illegal trafficking and the inflows into Trinidad and Tobago, as we embark upon the gun retrieval practice that we have a gun retrieval campaign going on, led by an assistant commissioner of police. Because I believe in this regard, I believe that the number of murders we have is largely tied to the easy access to firearms. So if we tighten up our borders, stop the inflow, and mop up that which is already in Trinidad and Tobago, I am confident with that, along with other measures, we will see a reduction in the crime and the violence leading to the murders that we now cope with. So the work continues.
Minister, your final thoughts?
As I said, in our new approach to dealing with the problems in respect of crime and violence in Trinidad and Tobago, the government is leading the way in a modernized and best practice approach of seeing it as a public health concern. And as I elucidated earlier, I would like to see every one of us as individuals, as parents, as workers, as teachers, as law enforcement personnel, as judges, magistrates, every one of us who live and benefit from the beauty that is Trinidad and Tobago, to love her, respect her, love yourself, respect yourself, love each other, respect each other, and let us do what we can to make Trinidad and Tobago a safer and a better place. And I give the assurance that leading the Ministry of National Security, I will continue as minister to provide the resources to clearly articulate and lay down government's policy and any changes therein, so that those within the family of national security would be properly guided as they do their work, optimizing the use of the resources available to them in getting the crime situation under control to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Minister, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Crime is always a hot button issue in Trinidad and Tobago, and I know it's not your first time on Delving Deeper, and we've certainly got to have you back soon again, because there's so much points we've missed in this half-an-hour segment.
Well, I'm in the mood for it now. Why don't you tell me when, and I'll be more than happy to be in your company again.
And that's our show. Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Sonolala, and on behalf of the entire crew, have a great night.